Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Book to Block, the series where I bring my fantasy novel to life in Minecraft, one block at a time. In the last episode, I worked on this lake up here, as well as the waterfall that it connects to. Near the end, I mentioned I was going to add a bit more greenery in between episodes, and I have. I forgot that you can just use bone meal just on the ground underwater, and it just creates this seagrass, nice in patches. So I went around and used that, as well as adding some more of these sea pickles, the lily pads you can see on the surface here, and then some of the dead coral spread out on the lower area, as well as a bit more of this seaweed here. After finishing off on the waterfall here, I mentioned I was going to continue on and work a bit more on the river. So here is a little time lapse of me digging it out and then filling it up, and I was also changing the bottom to mud. So let's go see that now. Alright, so now that we have this river as well as the lake here, mostly done. I might adjust the shape later on, but I think this is a good enough size for this area for a village to be built on it. So I'm thinking, kind of like the starter village, the people migrated to this area, saw the big pond, and then they kind of turned it into their way of life. So it might turn into a fisher village, or just maybe they're gathering salt from it, or any other resources you can get from a lake like this. So I'll figure out what they'll do as their jobs, and then I can start building up the village around here, maybe a little on the lake as well, and see what kind of styles I'm thinking for that. Alright, so here we are on the outskirts of the mountain range. As you can see up there, there's the waterfall area. So out here, I've done some planning on what I'm going to do for the fishing village. So obviously, we'll have the fishing docks, and then a smokehouse to process the fish so it can be smoked and preserved to go to other villages or the main city to be sold. I'm going to have a path that goes along the river and a bridge that goes over the river itself, just so you can get from one side to the other without having to go through or all the way around the lake. So I'm going to have a watchtower sort of in the center of the village, plus a signal fire to go to the main city, so if there's ever any trouble within the village, they can signal to the main city that they need assistance in anything. There's going to be a fish market, so that'll kind of be the center of the village. And then maybe some small farms on the outskirts to provide wheat and other forms of food, just so they're not surviving just on the fish. I'm also going to do vegetation in the lake and river, kind of like I did for the top waterfall bit. And then maybe add in a couple little secrets along the way, maybe something behind the waterfall or deep within the lake itself. So for kind of a block palette, I'm thinking of going for the oak look. So for the forest, that's going to be beside the village, so the one that's down on the plains, the big one, that'll be more of an oak forest instead of the spruce that I've been working on the outskirts. So I'll be using the palette of all the oak blocks, so from the logs to the stripped ones to the base oak planks. Then using a bit of cobblestone and mossy cobblestone, since it's on a water source, you kind of expect it to get a little bit mossy. And then maybe for some of the less built up housing, I'll use hay bales kind of as like a thatch roof. Alright, so back over here towards the lake, I added back in the label. Had to remove it whilst making this because it kept getting affected by the elevation tool. But as I said, so this is the forest that they'll probably be getting their wood from. So it'll be an oak forest in this kind of area. As you can see, I've kind of expanded the tree line a little bit further along. I'm working on getting that done all the way around the edge. But for over here, I think I'm going to do a little bit of a time lapse of doing little mark offs. So using a bit of colored wool or concrete to mark off where each kind of building is going to be in this area, where I'll put the little bridge and other details just to mark out so I can plan a little bit better of where I want everything. So without further ado, let's get towards that and then we can see how I'm going to build up each of the buildings. So halfway down the river, I'll have the bridge with the path leading from the village. This square will be the tower with the signal fire. This is around where I'll place the docks, and just by the docks will be the smokehouses where they'll process the fish. This X with the squares will be where the market square is, where most of the trading will happen in the village. In gray, I'll be drawing the roads / paths inside the village. A couple more smokehouses. And over there will be the housing district. In yellow is the wall that will protect the village from any harm. And in purple are the gates in and out of the village. Here I'm playing around with the shape of the dock. Just outside will be the stable for any travelers visiting. And on the far side of the lake will be the farming district, where livestock will be held and farms for different produce will be procured. Right at the main entrance will be the tavern for visitors to stay at and locals to drink at. Here will be the blacksmith and a general store. Right now I kind of have a base plan. I've thought it over and done a little bit of adjustments. So I'm going to remove this entrance over here, because we don't need too many entrances. I think this one being our main entrance, so I'll make it a slightly larger one that goes to main city. And then this one comes from this side. So I don't think we need this one over here. So I'm going to remove this one here. And since this is turning out to be a bigger project than I had planned, I think this will be split into multiple episodes. I'll tackle small bits in each one. In this one, I'll pick off a couple things. I think I'm going to do the little market here, work on the docks, and then have a kind of plan for the walls and then these entrances. So let's get started on those. So I've come up with a basic design for the walls. Right now this is the flat version. As you can see, it's going to be curved. So I'm going to have to plan how to stretch it out. So I'm doing with posts of wood using the oak logs, with a fence post and then a lantern on top for a bit of lighting. Then a bottom layer of just cobblestone, occasionally mixing in the mossy. Then doing one up here, 2 walls, and then repeating all the way. Having these fence gates on the edge just for a little bit of difference, so it's not too monotone with just the fences on top. But the tricky part is going to be getting it to work in a curved kind of line. So I'll try and figure out how to maintain the pattern whilst also getting a nice natural curve. Alright, while doing a little bit of the planning, I decided that instead of having a curved wall, I'm going to go more for straight walls. So more of just going from here to here, then probably here to here, there, and then one more to there, here, and then there. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it'll be 5 straight walls, because I found that it looks a lot better when you have walls like this instead of very random. It just was messing up and having to figure out how to get multiple walls in with the solid blocks themselves just didn't look right. So I'm going to go along, make the walls like this, and then later I'll paint in the mossy bits. I'll also choose how often I want these wooden posts, because they can go right beside one of these, and then I'd have to figure out how to interlace those with the walls. But I think I'll finish off those, leave gaps for the 2 entrances, and have it go straight up to the water, and then we can see how it looks after that. Alright, so now that we got kind of the wall planned out, it's a little bit more structured than I had planned, but for this kind of hilly area, it's kind of difficult, especially since I've made it such a short wall. You don't want it to be too fortified because it is just a fishing village. It's kind of hard to get the curve in while keeping the nice shape. So the next thing I said I was going to do is going to add a bit of the moss in. It's like on that one, it's a bit of a pattern of moss and regular cobblestone. So I'm going to have the masks top right here for just selecting cobblestone. I'm going to use the noise painter, so it's about 50-50 between the mossy cobble and the regular cobble. And then if I paint like that, you can see that some of them have turned to mossy, whereas others have stayed as the regular cobble. So I'll go around, add that into all the edges, and then we can move on to the next thing, which I think will be the market here. Alright, so over here at the market, I've kind of placed it out a little bit better. I've got kind of the open square area where people can mingle. I might set up little benches in the center. But over here, I've got a blacksmith, a fisherman, baker, a butcher, and a grocer. I got one more space, so if I can think of anything else, or if you can think of anything else, leave it in the comments and I can add that in here, or fill up any of the other spaces. But I think this is a good spot for any of you. If you have any good ideas of what would be good for a marketplace, I can add that in there. But let's start building each of these. So I kind of have a similar theme for all of them, using just the oak and then a bit of wool on top for kind of color coordination for each of these. So we'll see how each one's built, and then we can see how I decorate each one individually. And there we have it. So we got our 5 different stalls here. So starting over here at the blacksmith, we can add a little bit more detail. Just add a little item frames. Put a couple things in here. There's this command you can use where you can set them invisible. There you go. We can grab a couple, add them into on here. Maybe they're currently working on this axe here, so make that invisible. There we go. So we got someone working on that. And then for a little bit more detail, because you can see things like, why do I have this composter right here? I'm using kind of as like an empty barrel. Same for over here on the grocer. And the reason why is this stuff over here. So I got a little into using the custom player heads as entities. As you can see, I can just fly right through. And I made all these prepped for this, so I can just grab over. So we'll start with this one. So this is going to be for the wheat place over here. Need to rotate this around, and we can just slot this in here a little bit further over, and then bring her down into there. Click off. Now it looks like I got some barrels full of wheat and a big loaf of bread ready to be sold. And I can do the rest for all of these. So over here is the grocer. So these come into these barrels here. You can slide those in. Now it looks like we got some barrels of apples that can be sold. Over here is for the butcher. So here needs to be rotated. So we got a cow head on this metal surface, and then if we do this and I grab a couple of chains, that's why I left this front bit without the banners, so you could see the meat hang on the chains here. Another detail we can add is if I find, maybe use this, maybe have it as a bit of blood that's dripped down onto the ground. Bit more detail there. And then for the last one is the fisherman's area. So the fishmonger. So if I rotate these around, I can place this in here. Seems I've changed the layout without even noticing it. But if I rotate this so that it's just a little more settled like that. So you got a big fish on the counter here, a fish head back here, and a barrel of fish back here. So I'll probably go back to my other builds and play around with these custom head entities, just because they seem like a lot of fun, just to add a little bit more detail into your world. Unfortunately, these are visible when you're in creative, so if you want to get the real experience, you can hop over to survival and then they disappear and you can kind of experience it a little bit better. Again, these are entities, so you can just walk through them, but it just brings a little bit more life to your builds. I'll include a link to the website I use to get these custom heads, because they're just player heads, sort of like this one of mine right here. But they're entities, and then they're custom for different things. You can search what you want, and then, as you saw when I was placing them around, you get this little UI that you can use to move things around. If you've got experience in any like 3D modeling software like Blender or any of those types of things, that'll come in really handy for when you're placing these around, because it's the very similar structure. But I think that brings a bit more life into these builds. I've got to add a little bit more detail, and then I can start working on the pathing, and it'll make this little village come more to life. Alright, so for the pathing, I'm going to go into Axiom. I'm going to select all of these placeholder kind of pathings that I've made, and I'm just going to remove them, because now I kind of have an idea of where I want the pathing. So I'll go to Noise Painter. I do have quite a bit of experience now in pathing, since I have an episode on pathing. Check that out if you haven't seen it, or any of the YouTube shorts or TikToks I've posted about the different pathing. For this one, I'm going to use coarse dirt, dirt path, and rooted dirt with a very small amount of grass, just kind of like see if it's overgrown. So I'm going to shrink this down to about a 3 in radius and lower the scale because I want a very random noise there. And I got to take off this mask, and then I can kind of trace around this area. Bring that up into the market here. You can just add a little bit more of that, just a bit more difference. And then bring that to the front gate. I'm gonna have it come along here. So the tavern here, maybe a couple more houses around here. And this is gonna come through this little housing district that I've kind of designed up to this exit, and then further down for any more houses. I can extend it if I have more housing places I want to add. And then over here, so we got the main path that'll go over to the main city over there. So I've got the stables here, so I'm gonna have to maybe make a path just from the farming area up to there. And then I'll have the entrance to the farming area there, maybe a little house in here, the fields, and then animal pens that can supply our little market over here. Alright, so I've temporarily removed all of the red markers for all the different buildings and little signs of where the different districts will be, just so I could smooth out this area a little bit. I had a little bit of problem when I got up close. It was very rigid and just didn't really make sense for like some parts. Like where it had like just single holes. I haven't done too much over here, so I might like remove things like this. So just shrink that down and smooth out the area, just because when I was roughing out the planes, I didn't really look too closely since it's such a large area. I was just working on getting most of the roughing up done without really thinking about the small areas. So if I were to fly along here, you can kind of see I got little holes here, certain things that just don't look very good, that when I get to that area with building, or when I'm finished and I'm going back over the empty plane parts, I'll have to go through and kind of smooth out, which I use the smooth tool in Axiom. So I just kind of drag along, just makes it look a little bit more, well, smooth, and fixes any problems of having any odd areas. So now I'm going to go back through, make new placements for my different buildings, because now I kind of have a different border with the new wall that I designed, so I can kind of place in a little bit more final placements. So like things are going to stay like the tavern here, having the tower, I think I'll place that all on top of this little hill here, having the different like area for like the blacksmiths or general stores. This will be kind of a housing district. I'm going to replan out where I'm going to have the dock, how far I want it to go out, and like kind of the shape of it. But I think that will be done in the next episode. So I might just show a quick clip of me redrawing things here, and then for the next episode we can focus on start building some of these buildings that I have planned out, getting like rough shapes and maybe finishing a couple of the more important ones, and leaving maybe like the housing for another episode where it's just generic housing copied over and over with just some slight variations for a bit of uniqueness. But I think that's good for this episode. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a like. As I mentioned, if you have an idea for another stall in this area or any of the builds I've mentioned for this episode, please leave a comment suggesting whatever you think might fit. And subscribe for more videos coming soon. Until next time.